Hello and welcome to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from a real, honest perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 120. This is the Week 15 recap episode where we're going to discuss the Bengals' heartbreaking loss at home to the Baltimore Ravens, 24-0. The first time Joe Burrow has been shut out in his NFL career, the first time the Bengals have been shut out since 2017. This was not the game we were looking for. I had predicted a win going into this game. For some reason, I got my hopes up. I thought the Bengals were actually going to pull it out. Maybe the Ravens weren't as good as we thought they were, but unfortunately, Bengals lost by 24 points, and it's hard to say that the score, Zach Taylor, to his credit, didn't say the score wasn't indicative. It's hard to say you get beat 24-0 and it was a close game by two good teams. Obviously, the Ravens were the better team out there on the field today, but I got to give both teams credit just for going out there. I got to give everybody who was out at this game. I was at home because, you know why? It was cold as shit outside. It was like maybe 10 degrees when the game started, and despite league rules mandating that all NFL teams clear the stadium of snow before the game starts, it's supposed to be clear not only on the field for the safety of the players and the referees and coaches and everybody, but for the people in the stands. They're supposed to clear off all the snow. Unfortunately, that did not happen in Cincinnati, even though everybody knew that snow was on the way. This wasn't like a freak snowstorm out of nowhere. This was predicted. Snow was coming, but you could see on TV the stands that were full of people, which was about half of the stadium. The other half of the stadium was empty seats covered in snow because they couldn't be bothered to clear off the snow inside the stadium. So that's what you got for your money when you went out to see a Bengals game. There weren't as many fans as I would have expected from Baltimore. I thought maybe, Ravens fans would have traveled to this game, but I think the cold weather really discouraged anybody from wanting to go to this game except for crazy people. And even then, if you were a Bengals fan, you didn't even get to see any points, nothing to cheer about. They didn't even play the fight song. Like, after they score at least a field goal, you could have heard the fight song once, but nothing in this game. It was not a good game by Joe Burrow, but when you look at the statistics, it's crazy. Lamar Jackson beat the Bengals, and he only threw 12 passes. 2 of those were touchdown passes. He had 1 interception, but Lamar Jackson was 8 for 12 throwing the ball. Joe Burrow, 25 of 39, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And one of those interceptions turned into another pick 6. That's the 5th pick 6 the Bengals offense has given up this season. Shout out to Jay Morrison on Twitter/X. I was like, what's the record for pick 6 in a season? He got back. He said the record is 8, apparently, back in the early 2000s by the Miami Dolphins. I think he said it was 2007 or 2008. They had 8. The Bengals tied their franchise record with 5 pick 6s in this season. That 2 for Joe Burrow, 2 for Joe Flacco, and surprisingly only 1 for Jake Browning. Jake Browning had so many interceptions. I thought for sure more of them were going to be pick 6s, but there was a fumble 6 in there against the Vikings with Noah Fant. All that to say, this game eliminated the Bengals from playoff contention. I don't know if Zach Taylor got the memo after the game because it seemed like he was still talking about the Bengals still have a chance this season and they're going to turn things around and they still got everything left to play for coming up this season. It was weird. It was like, because the reporters kept trying to, circle back, like, yeah, right, Zach, but because he was like, this game was a tough game. And he was like really focused on scoring 0 points. And of course, he's the offensive play caller. So scoring 0 points doesn't reflect well on anybody. I would say, to the credit, the Bengals defense, at least in the first quarter, they looked pretty good. You know, Miles Murphy was out there making plays. He had like 2 sacks in the game or something like that. Miles Murphy was, Demetrius Knight was making plays. He had did he have an interception? But Demetrius Knight had a couple sacks on Lamar Jackson. They sacked Lamar Jackson 3 times. They forced an interception. I mean, it wasn't all bad. You're going to look at the score, the fact that the Bengals got eliminated from the playoffs, and think everything was horrible about this game. I mean, for a while there, the game was, I'll put it like this, the game was scoreless up until 4.5 minutes left to go in the second quarter. It was 0-0, very even game. You didn't know which way it was going to go. So at least it was competitive for a little bit. And then all of a sudden, the Ravens scored 2 touchdowns back-to-back, went up 14-0 going into halftime, never looked back after that. Obviously, the Bengals scored 0 points, so after the first touchdown, it was over. But you thought the Bengals, even without T. Higgins, thankfully, T. Higgins made the right decision by not playing in this game, not risking his health any further. And you have to wonder how many other guys, not questioning their effort, but it was cold out there. And we saw a lot of guys going down with injuries. I think, just due to the fact it was so cold, you get hit. These guys are trying to be tough out there, but that can hurt a lot. And we saw lots of guys going down. We saw Amarius Mims, Chris Jenkins, DJ Turner, BJ Hill, all had to leave the game at different points. Most of those guys returned. I don't know if any of those are going to be long-term injuries. It looked like Amarius Mims just kind of banged knees with a guy, which obviously would be very painful. You have somebody, going the opposite direction and you run into each other's knees. Both of those guys were down for a couple minutes, and I don't blame them. But there were some Ravens players after the game. I think one of the guys on defense said how he thought that it didn't seem like the Bengals wanted to play it, or he said it was too cold for them. He said, it was too cold for those guys. And the Bengals have a lot of guys who are from warmer parts of the country. Like, we got 2 offensive linemen from Georgia. You got, Jamar Chase is from Louisiana. Andre Osivach is from Hawaii. These guys aren't necessarily used to this type of weather. And, I mean, this was one of the top 5 coldest games in Bengals history. It was like between 10 and 12 degrees, but also there was wind. You could see the guy's breath reflecting in the sunlight, and then their breath was blowing. You could tell there was wind out there. That made the wind chill probably close to 0. And there were guys running around with no sleeves on. And hey, to their credit, I saw the cheerleaders out there. I'm sure they had some kind of flesh-colored or see-through leggings or whatever, but the cheerleaders were out there doing their thing during the game. Credit to all the people. Hopefully everybody was bundled up, but that was not a pleasant environment to anybody. So that's maybe why we didn't see a lot of fans booing. We didn't really hear much of the fans. Maybe the fans were just too cold to make any noise whatsoever. But it was obviously quiet when the Ravens were scoring touchdowns. Didn't even hear a lot of Ravens fans going crazy either. I think everybody was just too cold to really, spend a lot of energy yelling. They were more worried about surviving and getting the F out of there at the end of the game. By the end, people were clearing out pretty much nonstop. It was empty in there by the time the game was over at 24-0. Especially after that Joe Burrow pick 6, when it looked like they were going to they had, I think it was their first time they got it within the 10-yard line in the whole game, and then they threw a pick 6 after an Orlando Brown false start. The first time he got called for a false start in the game, but he constantly is on the edge of the false start. He tries to get that little extra jump start every play, and they rarely call it, but sometimes it's just too egregious not to call. But Joe Burrow got sacked, I think, 4 times in this game. Let me go over to the box score again. They only credited... Oh, no, Lamar Jackson got sacked 4 times. They only said Joe Burrow got sacked 3 times, but one of those was a critical sack early in the first quarter when it looked like the Bengals were going to be in scoring position. Joe Burrow took a 15-yard sack on like 3rd and 8 or something like that. Moved him all the way back outside of field goal range. They had to punt it away. Not Joe Burrow's best game. And we have to remember, again, he's still coming back from that toe injury. And like I said, in the cold, what's the first thing that's going to, start getting numb and stiffening up? Your feet, your toes. So that is not going to help Joe Burrow in his attempt to make this comeback. Not that Joe Burrow played poorly. I know Joe Burrow was very hard on himself after the game, said he took most of the blame, and he said it was one of the worst games that he's played. He hasn't played that many games this season. So, like Zach Taylor said before all this, his favorite thing to do on planet Earth is to watch Joe Burrow play football. So even though they didn't score any points, at least we got to watch Joe Burrow play in a football game and not get injured, which was weird because they were down 24-0 and Joe Burrow was still in the game. And Zach Taylor said the reason why Joe Burrow continued to play, even though it was 24-0, like late in the fourth quarter, 5 minutes left to go in the game, was, well, we didn't have time to get Joe Flacco warmed up. It was cold, and, it was a quick, turnaround. We couldn't get Joe Flacco. That doesn't make any sense, dude. Just put Joe Flacco's ass in the game. Get Joe Burrow out of there. They had Joe Burrow all the way into the game until the bitter end when they were just running out the clock themselves. They were just handing it off to Samaje Perine, who had gone out with, I thought, had some kind of injury. It was weird. Samaje Perine went down clutching his knee or his ankle. I couldn't tell what happened. I thought he was going to be done for sure, and then later he came back and started taking carries in the end of the game over Taj Brooks. Like, why don't they put this rookie, Taj Brooks? The only thing they let Taj Brooks do was return kickoffs after Charlie Jones got hurt. So many guys got hurt for the Bengals and the Ravens, but it was a rough game out there. Jamar Chase was really the only one who had much production. 10 catches on 16 targets, 132 yards, obviously no touchdowns, along with 34. He did have a couple of drops. They were tough catches. One of them went off Jamar Chase's hands up into the air, and Marlon Humphrey ended up intercepting that and returning it for like 20 yards. There was another play where Jamar Chase early in the first half had his man beat, like on a slant route. Got wide open. Joe Burrow left the pass a little bit too far behind Jamar. He had to reach back, wasn't able to catch it. If it had been out in front of Jamar, like it was on that one 34-yard catch and run, this would have been a big gain. But unfortunately, they didn't connect. Like I said, there was a good play by Joe Burrow where he was scrambling out to his right. Jamar Chase just got lost in the Ravens zone defense. Nobody picked him up, surprisingly. You would think they would have like all eyeballs on Jamar Chase, but everybody just kind of let Jamar go. Joe Burrow found him, hit him in stride perfectly, and allowed Jamar to turn it up the right sidelines. But the other leading receiver behind Jamar Chase and his 132 yards was Chase Brown, who had 37 yards, 7 catches on 7 targets, long of 9. But then after that, Mitch Tinsley, 1 catch for 16 yards. Tanner Hudson, 3 catches for 16 yards. Drew Sample, 2 catches for 12 yards. Mike Gesicki, 1 for 11. Samaje Perine, 1 for 1 yard. And my boy, Andre Iosivas, no catches on 1 target. He had what looked like a wide open seam route and wasn't able to complete the catch all the way to the ground. It looked like one of the defenders kind of knocked it out while they were going to the ground. Couldn't make the hands catch, Andre. But without T. Higgins, they didn't really have much of a threat. I thought Mike Gesicki was going to be a lot more involved. He only had 2 targets. The other target that he wasn't able to pull in was 4th and 4. I think this was in the second half, third quarter. Bengals are driving into Ravens territory, but I think they were down 17-0 at that point. They were going for it, trying to be aggressive, not kick a field goal or punt it. I'll have to go back and watch if there were other better options open on 4th and 4, but he decided to go into what seemed like double coverage with Mike Gesicki, but Mike Gesicki got a hand on it in the end zone. Only one hand. He wasn't able to make the catch. There were a couple, it's hard, like when they go 24-0, it's hard to say they didn't play that bad. But when you go back and think about it, there were opportunities to score points, certainly. They could have kicked a field goal a couple times. They were going for touchdowns when they were already down by 2 touchdowns. But there was a pass in the first half, I think it was the second quarter, to Jamar Chase. It looked like it was going to get completed. Joe Burrow said after the game he was happy with where he put the ball, but he felt like the defender kind of got away with a little bit of hold on Jamar Chase. They didn't call it, and it was just the timing was a little bit off. It was an incomplete pass instead of what could have been a potential touchdown. So they didn't connect on that. There was a pass he threw to Mitch Tinsley in the back of the end zone that Mitch Tinsley had in both hands. It would have been an amazing acrobatic catch, but that's what Mitch Tinsley has been doing since preseason. But he wasn't able to make the catch. The ball flew up in the air. The Bengals combined for 100 total rushing yards between Chase Brown and his 53, Samaje Perine and his 42, and Joe Burrow in 5 yards. But they never broke off a long, explosive play like the Ravens did. Bengals' longest carry was Chase Brown of 10 yards. On the other side, Derrick Henry, 11 carries, 100 yards himself. No touchdowns, but Derrick Henry, average of 9.1 per carry. Keaton Mitchell also added 66 yards on 88 carries, average of 8.3 per carry. Lamar Jackson, two carries, 26 yards, average of 13. And there were numerous runs over 20 yards, especially in the second half. The Bengals defense kind of broke down. Myles Murphy was looking good in that first quarter, but then after that, they kind of figured out what Myles Murphy was going to try to do. They were able to get him sucked inside, give up the outside contain, and there was nobody else out there. Bengals linebackers got totally faked out multiple times. They weren't able to make the plays at the second level. And then we saw Bengals safeties like Jordan Battle and Geno Stone not able to come up and make a tackle. We did see Jordan Battle make a nice interception on a tip pass off of Zay Flowers' hands. He kind of had a similar thing with Jamar Chase. I think Jamar Chase's interception came first, and then a couple plays later, Zay Flowers couldn't catch the pass from Lamar Jackson. It was a perfect pass from Lamar. Zay just had it pop out of his hands into the hands of Jordan Battle. And they were talking about how it was so cold out there that, your toes, your hands, your fingers, everything is going to be hard to get warmed up and get the blood flowing through everything. So, some passes. Zay Flowers also had a pass go through his hands in the back of the end zone. It looked like it could have been a touchdown, or the Ravens had to settle for a field goal. So this could have been 28-0 very easily if Zay Flowers had caught that. But again, could have been, 24-14 or something if the Bengals had converted on a couple of their opportunities. It wasn't the worst game ever. I'll go back to that Vikings game. They lost 48-10. At least they didn't lose by 38 in this game. They only lost by 24, and it doesn't really matter whether they lost by 1 or 100 points. A loss is still a loss. They're still eliminated. And Jamar Chase, after the game, he said, he even said he would rather lose and get their butts whooped than lose on like a last-second field goal, and it's totally heartbreaking. Not that any of those is easy to accept. Of course, Zach Taylor after the game was talking about how it's unacceptable and it's frustrating and this and that and the other thing. But at the same time, he has total confidence in everybody. They got all the right coaches. They got all the right players. He's, sure that they're on the right track and they're going to get some momentum and win some games. And Ben Baby from ESPN asked Zach Taylor, okay, but besides wins, because it doesn't matter, what else do you want to see out of this team? And Zach Taylor was like, just wins. We just want to win. So I don't know what fans of the Bengals are supposed to get excited about for the rest of the games. I mean, like I said, I'm going to watch the rest of the games because I'm a Bengals fan. That's what you do. I'm not going to be watching the Browns games. Instead of that, the Browns are even worse than the Bengals. So I'll probably be watching somebody. I'm not going to be watching Phillip Rivers and the Colts. They lost. Even though, to his credit, Phillip Rivers had a touchdown pass in that comeback. They didn't lose that bad. They lost 16-18 in Seattle. So maybe the Colts could win a couple games and get into the playoffs. You never know. But, I mean, that would be, the grass is always greener, Joe Burrow, he's still more interesting than Phillip Rivers, even if Phillip Rivers has grandchildren at this point. Who knows? Maybe Joe Burrow could become a father himself. He said he's got a lot of stuff going on in his life. You don't know what's going on with Joe Burrow in his life. Jamar Chase said he doesn't know what's going on, what's just going through Joe Burrow's mind, but maybe he's going to have to do a better job of picking him up and supporting him. The Bengals are going to have to pick each other up, and who is going to be, like they say, who wants to be on the team next year? There's been a lot of guys who, there's been questions, are they going to be on the team next year? People like Myles Murphy, he's starting to make a run for the Bengals to extend his fifth-year option, probably after, a couple good games. Let me look at his statistics in this game. Myles Murphy, 2 tackles for a loss, though. And yeah, they were both sacks on Lamar Jackson. So 3 quarterback hits by Myles Murphy. He was in the backfield making his presence known. And also Demetrius Knight Jr., rookie linebacker, 6 total tackles, 2 sacks for Demetrius Knight also. 2 tackles for a loss, a couple quarterback hits. So Myles Murphy and Demetrius Knight were the 2 players who really stood out for the Bengals on defense. Jordan Battle led the team with 8 tackles. B.J. Hill, 5 tackles. Geno Stone, 4 tackles. But then Barrett Carter only had 3 tackles, 2 solo. I think he played the whole game. Oren Burks only had one tackle. I mean, the thing that was crazy, when you looked at the statistics, the Ravens only ran 40 offensive plays to the Bengals 70. Something like that. It was like 71 to 40. And the Bengals were controlling the time of possession. The Bengals had the ball for, let me go to the team stuff. The Bengals had the ball for 39 minutes and 19 seconds to the Ravens 20 and 41 seconds. So almost 2-1 time of possession in favor of the Bengals, but they scored 0 points. And they ran 71 plays, didn't quite gain 300 yards of offense in those 71 plays, 9 drives. It was a similar strategy. It seemed like the Bengals were trying to shorten the game and hope that they could prevent their defense from being on the field for too long. They thought that if they had Joe Burrow on the field for as much as possible, they could control the game. The only problem was Joe Burrow wasn't able to put the ball in the end zone and score any points. And just when it looked like they threw another pick 6. And this was a good scheme by the Ravens defensively. Kind of tricked the Bengals offense, and especially Dylan Fairchild. There was a couple plays where Dylan Fairchild gave up like almost immediate pressure into Joe Burrow's lap. On this pick 6, Joe Burrow just kind of threw the ball out of self-preservation mode. He was just kind of ducking out of the way, trying not to get his head taken off because there was like a 275-pound guy running straight at his chest. This ball had no chance to be completed. The guy he was throwing to, I think it was Tanner Hudson, didn't even have his head turned around or look for the football yet. Kyle Van Noy had dropped out into coverage. It looked like he was going to come in and rush the passer, and then at the last second he dropped out. Joe Burrow didn't see him, threw it right to him. This is kind of another similar type of scenario to Joe Flacco. I want to say maybe in that, was it the Steelers game or whatever game that was, where he threw it right to the guy. Same kind of thing, it's like you got somebody about to hit you. You just kind of throw the ball and hope for the best. And in this case, unfortunately, it led to another defensive score for the Ravens that put this game away. The Ravens had a good blitz call. That was in the opposite of what the Bengals did. The Bengals got the Ravens into a 3rd and long. I think it was like 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6 in that first quarter. But the Ravens' first score came on a screen pass where they played on the aggressiveness of Myles Murphy and the Bengals defense to rush upfield. Perfectly timed screen pass out to Rasheen Ali in the right. And then there was nobody there for the Bengals defense to stop him all the way for like a 30-yard touchdown. Joseph Osai wasn't fast enough to get there. None of the safeties could come over. Geno Stone and Jordan Battle are so slow. They're not able to react when something happens in the open field. There was another play, the second touchdown for the Ravens came on another play where the Bengals safeties aren't fast enough to get across the field. This time, Zay Flowers on a deep go route up the left sideline. Lamar Jackson saw him. He was in the hole in the zone between the corner and the safety, who was Geno Stone. Perfect pass from Lamar Jackson. Great job of getting separation in that zone by Zay Flowers and able to complete the catch for the touchdown that put them up 14-0. And at that point, it felt, like the game was pretty much over by halftime. Zach Taylor, like I said, he took accountability. He said he was frustrated. He said it was, unacceptable. All these cliche words that don't mean anything. Unacceptable, and you're going to take accountability. But then at the same time, nothing ever changes. They don't put any different players on the field. Like, we still see Geno Stone instead of any of the other safeties. They could have PJ Jules was inactive for this game, but Tyson Anderson still doesn't play for whatever reason. He can't be that bad. He's faster than Geno Stone. So he can't be a worse tackler than Geno Stone. But they still keep putting Geno Stone out there, and he's a total liability. Injuries obviously didn't help the Bengals in this game, and maybe that was one of the things that I'm not questioning the effort, but maybe they're just in the back of their minds weren't playing quite as hard as they would if they were still in the playoff hunt, in the chance to get to the Super Bowl this year. Maybe in the back of their mind they're thinking, okay, we're 4-9 when the game starts. We don't really have a chance. The Ravens are, still have something to play for. They still could have their season end up in the Super Bowl. So just the motivation probably was 1 or 2 notches higher for the Ravens than for the Bengals, and that's just natural. But Bengals have the Miami Dolphins, who I think play tomorrow against the Steelers. They haven't played yet, so we don't know. This may be a short week for them. If they're looking a little bit better, they have more wins than the Bengals do this year. But I think they asked Joe Burrow, is he still going to continue to play? I think he will continue to play just because he wants to go out there and go up against elite competition, show the world what he's all about, keep racking up statistics in terms of getting to, be potentially a Hall of Fame quarterback someday. He's going to need as many passing yards, touchdowns, all that kind of stuff he can get. Zach Taylor obviously is focused purely on getting wins, but they're 4-10 this season, 2-5 at home. They got 2 more home games coming up against the Cardinals and then the last game against the Browns. It's going to be interesting to see how many fans show up, especially when, like I said, the Bengals defense or the Bengals franchise doesn't necessarily respect the fans that much when they can't even clear the snow off of the seats. So, not the best of times for this Bengals team. We even saw, apparently, Zach Moss was getting involved on social media, replying to somebody about how the Bengals are the worst franchise in sports or something like that. Zach Moss is a little bit burned by the fact the Bengals released him. I don't know what the financial situation was with Zach Moss, but he also played like seemingly numerous games with a broken neck, and who knows if the Bengals team doctors like misdiagnosed him. So maybe there was a little bit of hard feelings from Zach Moss by the fact that, hey, you guys let me play with a broken neck for multiple games and then release me. And so, we've seen some players not have the best of interactions with this Bengals team. I'll be watching to see how many fans show up from the wearing orange and black and not the other teams. I don't want to see a bunch of like Cleveland Browns fans doing the dog pound, whatever, in Cincinnati in the last game of the season with Shadur Sanders or something like that. That's what we don't need. So, games with Joe Burrow where he stays healthy, there was a lot of players getting hurt out there, but thankfully it wasn't Joe Burrow. It wasn't Jamar Chase. It was, I hate to say it like this, but if Charlie Jones gets hurt, it's not the end of the world. If Joe Burrow gets hurt, it is kind of the end of the world. So as long as Joe Burrow is able to go out there and start in the rest of these games, if it's fine with Joe Burrow to go out there and risk it, we're going to have to get better offensive line play. Can't be giving up like free shots on Joe Burrow, or he's going to have to do a lot more dodging out of the way, or they're going to have to put Joe Flacco in there, let him take some of these shots. Because there were a couple of situations where Joe Burrow was taking hits, and it felt like he was trying to bait out a flag, trying to bait out a late hit or something. There were multiple times where the Bengals were getting kind of dragged down late, and fans were booing and thought it should have been like a late hit or something like that. But that's kind of, the Bengals were really like begging for penalties. They were committing a lot of penalties themselves, but they were trying to like get these cheap penalties on the Ravens because they weren't scoring any points. Maybe they didn't think they could win. Maybe the Bengals deep down inside thought that they didn't stand a chance going into this game. Who knows what the practices were like, what the conversations in the locker room were like, but players have a certain sense of what to expect. Maybe the Bengals offensively thought that they could just go out and score points, but the Bengals, they did have to settle for 6 field goals in that Thanksgiving game against the Ravens. They didn't have that many touchdowns. They got stopped numerous times by the Ravens on defense, so they knew it wasn't going to be easy, but maybe they thought Derrick Henry was going to be too much for this Bengals defense. I don't know. Maybe they just didn't have that same fire that I was expecting to see out of a team that was, supposedly in do or die, must win type territory. But unfortunately, I don't expect there to be any changes within the organization, coaching wise, like talent evaluations, scouting wise, anything like that. I think they're just going to say, Joe Burrow was injured for half the season. That's the only reason why we weren't good. And we're just going to run it back next season with whatever draft picks we get. We're not going to make any trades. We're not going to do anything exciting. And we're just going to fade into Bolivian, as Mike Tyson used to say. But this podcast won't be fading into Bolivian. We'll be back here on the next episode for a preview of Week 16 against the Dolphins. But if you've listened all the way to the end, you must be super hardcore, either into the Bengals or podcasts, or you've accidentally stumbled here. I don't know why you would be listening all the way to the end, but thank you if you have. Let me know, is this Bengals team headed down the drain? Are they going to be able to turn it around next season? Do you even care about the rest of these 3 games that they have on their schedule? But with that, I'm going to leave you with a hooday and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.